spare. Willy wedding. Harry writes that after he returned to Britain, the palace announced that William was going to marry. We're now in November 2010. He somewhat tetchily remarks that it was news to him, that all the time that they spent together in Lesotho, it hadn't been mentioned to him. And he explains then, the papers published florid stories about the moment I realised Willy and Kate were well matched. The moment I appreciated the depth of their love, and thus decided to gift Willy the ring I'd inherited from Mummy, the legendary sapphire, a tender moment between brothers, a bonding moment for all three of us, and absolute rubbish. None of it ever happened. I never gave Willy that ring because it wasn't mine to give. He already had it. He'd asked for it after Mummy died, and I'd be more than happy to let it go. Once again, of course, one wonders, is this the case that it actually worked out that way? Because Harry does become something of an unreliable narrator. And because of the tainting effect of his wife and the impact that she has on him, whereby he has told porky pies, it makes it very difficult to discern whether events such as these can be viewed as ones that took place or not. He then explains that William focused on the wedding and he wished him well with it, and this caused Harry to think long and hard about his own status. He explained that he wanted to be a young husband and he wanted to be a young father, and he'd resolved not to become his dad. He explained that Charles had always been an older dad and he felt that was problematic. He explained that basically, because of that, he was more sedentary. He liked his routines. He wasn't someone that would run around with them. He had once, but then that stopped. And he talks with fondness about a game that his father played with them. And he said that he always promised that he would maintain the enthusiasm, the physical side of things with the children. And then he started to wonder whether that would actually be the case. He then wondered why the thing that he wanted so much wasn't actually happening, and then worried about what would happen if it never actually occurred. And he said, well, he still had his soldiering, if only he had a deployment date. So it seems here that he feels that he's a little bit cut adrift, that he doesn't really know where he's going to end up. And it's interesting, actually, to see that he writes about wanting to be a dad, that he wanted to get married, and he actually thought that he'd be the one that would get married and become a father before William. Something that seems to be very important to Harry. Now, understanding that, of course, it again gives us further insight as to why he became so easy to ensnare. He's a lost soul, troubled, feeling as he hasn't got any real sort of purpose. The army, whilst proving fruitful for him, had also proven somewhat frustrating because, of course, he'd been pulled out of the war zones. He sees his brother getting married, and, of course, his brother goes on to have children. He enjoys the practical side of things in terms of having that kind of involvement. But what is obvious is he seems aimless. He seems to be drifting. Now, it's still a number of years before the spider crept into his life, but it shows just how easy he was to ensnare, that he wanted to settle down. And of course, as you know, narcissists want to nail our prey by drawing you into a relationship and making that relationship formal as quickly as possible. Once our narcissism has determined that you're the best person who can be controlled, that you're fountaining with fuel, that you've got oodles of character traits and residual benefits, basically the narcissism goes, get that fucker nailed down, get the deal done. And therefore, the narcissist goes hell for leather to draw that person in with the golden period. And thus, what are the main ways of being able to do that? Marriage and children. And thus, because Harry wanted those things, and they serve a purpose to the narcissist to embed and ensnare the victim, it was only a matter of time before Harry's wife would ensure that marriage would take place. Her narcissism would compel her to pull out all of the stops, flattering him, pretending to understand him, duplicating his mother, and of course lashings of spicy poontang to ensure that he was ensnared, moving on then quickly through the gears of engagement, marriage, and then children. Harry is musing over what he might do, and he explains that he thought there would always be charitable work for him to do, and he then said it was serendipity when he heard from a group of wounded soldiers who were planning a trek to the North Pole. They were wanting to raise money for walking with the wounded, and they invited him, and he wanted to do it, but the only issue was the trek was very close to Willy's announced wedding date, and he'd have to get there and back with no hitches, otherwise he could miss the ceremony. And he sought advice from JLP, and he said, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, go for it. And therefore, he said that there was one other place that he needed to go, and that JLP had organised for him to have a trip to Berlin. So in December 2010, on a bitterly cold day, he went there and put his fingertips to the bullet holes in the city walls, the still fresh scars from Hitler's insane vow to fight to the last man. And he talks about the various places that he went, and he then talks about how the appearance in the Nazi uniform was a failure of education, not just school education, but self-education. He hadn't known enough about the Nazis, which seems rather incredible, because if you're British, you know all about the Second World War and the Nazis. It's almost that you know about these things by osmosis. It permeates everything. You're taught it at school. You see reminders of it in terms of course, the Armistice Day and, of course, Remembrance Sunday are about remembering the fallen from all conflicts, but there's a heavy emphasis on the two world wars. And, of course, with that comes recognition of the Nazis. There are so many films one can see that involve the Nazis, so it's rather extraordinary that Harry seems to think that he just hadn't known enough about them. When you're British, it's embedded in our history. But he says that he resolved to change that issue. Again, is he that thick? Is he that dim-witted? Quite possibly he is. Or is he making excuses again for deficiencies in his character? You be the judge of that. Well, although the wedding was on the horizon, it's the North Pole before we get to that. So, here comes the ice.